Well, in this lovely January Saturday morning, nice and cool in Florida, in my little guest room office, it's 69 degrees. Beautiful. I thought I would do session 3 of my introduction to Christianity. I wanted to go over history, the history of regarding Jesus, and which means, of course, the history of his people, Israel, and what was happening in first century Judaism, etc. As I've said, these things are not very planned, but I've taught this for many, many years. And a couple of nights ago, I was thinking I couldn't sleep, early in the morning, 3 in the morning or something, 2 in the morning. And I was going over some of the stuff that I would say, etc. Again, on my website, Bible Explainer, um, I have something called Various Biblical Writings for Courses. And one of the courses is Intro to the Bible. It's about 200 pages, as I've said. And there's a table of contents there, which will include the history of Israel and the making of the Bible, the importance of how the canon is put together, in this case, the Jewish canon, which is a Genesis to Chronicles canon. I think even at the time of Jesus, with that third category of writings, undetermined, the first book would be the Psalms, and that's what Luke 24:44 has Jesus say, everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms had to be fulfilled, etc. Prophets being, of course, again, latter prophets, former prophets and latter prophets. Then I have a very interesting, I think, section, a chapter called the Book of Daniel, Jewish Apocalyptic and the Intertestamental Period, the period between the two testaments where the Jews continued to write, but these things largely were not included in their final canon. And the canon was finalized in Judaism, I think around the year 100 of the Common Era, so 70 years after Jesus died. So during his lifetime, I think it's possible that some of these books, well, certainly Qumran would have accepted as biblical certain books, or as inspired certain books like Jubilees and a lot of Enoch. And then, famously do not have any copies of Esther in Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls. So as the background for the understanding of Christian origins. So if you want to understand how Christianity arose, you would have to understand Jewish apocalyptic, especially something like First Enoch and some of the Dead Sea Scrolls ideas and writings, etc. And so I just wanted to sort of, you know, uh, make reference to that. But Jesus, of course, is a Jew from the first century, born around 4 BC, the end of the reign of Herod the Great. And apparently, according to Luke, he only makes a public appearance around the age of 30, or his public appearance around the age of 30. And I think that if we were to follow Mark, he manifests himself basically, if you will, being baptized by John the Baptist. So John the Baptist is a known figure. Josephus mentions him and devotes a lot of space to him, more than he does to Jesus. And John the Baptist, as I've said, represents this reawakening of prophecy in Israel, or in a sense, the awakening of God, reawakening of Yahweh after a long period of sleep. There's a famous passage in Isaiah 51, verse 9, where Yahweh is called upon to wake up his arm. This is the famous liberating arm shown in Egypt in the Exodus, and to awaken again, as in the days of old when he uh, split Rahab and pierced dragon, etc. So this portion of Isaiah is hearkening back to basically Ugaritic mythology, creation or cosmogonical myths, meaning the gods struggled among themselves against death or against sea, Yam or Mot, or all these other words very similar to uh, Hebrew, which is the language that comes into this land with the uh, invading tribes of Israel and perhaps other people, but that Ugaritic culture had existed there previously. And the poetry here in Isaiah is hearkening back to these primeval acts described in a way much different than in Genesis, which is very sober. God speaks and creates. Here, the poet is using mythological, very graphic, impacting images of battles against sea monsters. And of course, we could think of Jesus in Mark 4 when he not only calms sea, but he actually commands sea with the same exorcism rebuke, if you will, muzzle yourself, as a beast or a rabid dog would be muzzled. That's what's usually translated as be silent. It's literally muzzle yourself. The same command he gives to the first possessed man in Mark 4, in Mark 1. So here in Mark 4, this leads to the question, who is this who even wind and sea obey, etc. So I'm kind of giving you a picture of what the Gospels are saying about Jesus and in what context. But he definitely is born in a context of expectation. John the Baptist has a lot of influence over the people. If we were to listen to Josephus, and I think there's little reason to doubt it here, Herod did a preemptive strike against John the Baptizer because he feared that at his word, the populace could revolt. So that in Josephus's Antiquities, if I'm not mistaken, he's trying to explain, as I said before, I have a session on the Christian story factor fiction. It's a catchy title, simplistic, to try to get attention, draw attention to it. But uh, John the Baptist in Josephus is killed because of this preemptive action taken by Herod to avoid a popular disturbance. very much like Jesus, was preemptively, I think, arrested and removed from the scene before the feast, not during the feast, lest the people rise up, etc. That's what is said in Mark, in the entry in Mark. They want to arrest Jesus, but not during the feast, lest the people, rise up. Having trouble finding that right now, but in any case. So, if Jesus goes to be baptized by John the Baptist, at a minimum, he is listening to John and accepting this intervention of God, perhaps a la Malachi, this messenger sent before the great and terrible day of Yahweh at the end of Malachi, who is at the end of Malachi identified with Elijah. Behold, I send you Elijah. Or remember the law of Moses, my servant, and behold, I send you Elijah before the great terrible day of Yahweh. So that that already places us in a very interesting context. I think Malachi would be considered to be certainly in a Deuteronomic, Levitical school of Judaism, as opposed to the priestly Sadducee, Saddokite school, which would accept only the Torah. Malachi is the last prophet, and the prophets were accepted by the Pharisees and by eschatological groups such as the Dead Sea Scrolls community. And so we place Jesus within that kind of Judaism. It is not the Judaism in that's ruling, even though the Pharisees were seeking to increase their influence and power and will prevail in the form of the rabbis after the temple is destroyed and the Sadducees disappear from the scene. The rabbis are the descendants of the Pharisees. They believe in both a written Torah and an oral Torah transmitted to Joshua and a series of personages, Samuel and finally Ezra and Nehemiah, then yokes of rabbis or pairs of rabbis. You've probably heard of Hillel and Shammai uh, around the time of Jesus and the question on divorce. Can you divorce your wife for any reason, like Hillel, the liberal, says, or do you have to have a more specific reason uh, to comply with Deuteronomy, I think 24, the one on divorce, as Shammai would insist, etc. So this is kind of what is happening broadly. But Jesus goes to be baptized by John. And so he believes that John is a true prophet, uh, preparing the people who will listen to him for this divine intervention that is going to happen. The scene in Malachi is that of a great and terrible day, but the role of Elijah is to reconcile fathers and sons, etc., lest I come and smite the land with anathema, my Bible says here. And I do believe and from a study of mysticism and religious experiences and William James and all this kind of stuff, that Jesus had a revelatory experience. And I think, I don't doubt the way I approach these things in the Bible, etc. And as a believing Catholic, I certainly think the baptism could have been the occasion in which, at this juncture of Jesus's act of humility and conversion, so to speak, confessing sins, preparing for this coming of God, preparing for the coming of the Spirit, which is something that was expected in Judaism. You know, the first text that comes to mind to me is the chapter in Ezekiel 38, I believe. This is the battle of Gog and Magog. Perhaps more correctly, in the end of 39, there's an ingathering in Ezekiel. Of course, a return to the land. I will pour out my spirit on the house of Israel, and I will no longer hide my face from them. There are passages in Isaiah, oh, would that you rent the heavens and come down, which is also indicative of this expectation. Is in Isaiah 63 at the end. This expectation of God coming down and God finally saving the people. It would not be primarily conceived as something apolitical, having nothing to do with the Roman presence in Israel. You know, it would be a real salvation, like leaving Egypt or freeing the people from the Gentiles, etc., as the book of Ben Sira, Ecclesiasticus, which is only in the Catholic and like Bibles, manifest your glory as in the days of old, and smite and free your people from the pagans that are oppressing it and occupying your land. So that this is, a great expectation in Judaism of a big change. And I think Jesus has to be situated within that. Exactly how he will assimilate, appropriate, and understand this revelation that he's received is some of the stuff we want to talk about today. I mentioned history, but I'm getting kind of sort of, I hope not carried away in a bad sense, into what's going on with Jesus that launches him into this ministry. And clearly, I think most scholars would agree that the notion of sonship, special sonship, is crucial in Jesus. He goes around with an authority and a certainty of his syntony, so to speak, his agreement with God, his understanding and knowledge of what God really is. God, his Father, Abba, as he prays in Gethsemane and in other places perhaps. He feels God has broken into him in the way Israel had been expecting. He's the sort of pioneer for this. And this means a move away from this pure fire and brimstone stuff of the end of Malachi, where there's refinement of the sons of Levi, and the Lord is going to smite the earth with the anathema or the curse or something. And John the Baptist, what is said about him, the axe is laid to the root, and every tree that doesn't give fruit, etc., will be burned, or they fast. And clearly, Jesus is known not to be a fasting person. He goes to the desert and fasts for 40 days, like Moses. But he's known as a man of meals, a man of ingathering, a prophet, if you will, that is reenacting the ingathering, reunification of the 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples or apostles, which was probably the very first characteristic of the messianic era. The two sticks in Ezekiel 37 and other places. So he's clearly, from a historical point of view, doing things that place him in a certain context. The good shepherd, seeking stray sheep sinners. The doctor, inviting or attending to the sick, binding them, etc. That's Ezekiel 34, which is a confrontational and hopeful passage. Ezekiel 34 lambasts, reproaches the shepherds of Israel, which is a reference to the kings primarily of Israel. So when we talk about good shepherd, we're not necessarily talking about Pastor Bill Jones in some church or something. We're talking about the leaders. And so Yahweh in Ezekiel 34 says he will remove the sheep, take out the sheep from the jurisdiction of or rule of these shepherds, and he will himself shepherd his sheep and take them to lie down and rest and eat, and will find the stray sheep, the outcast sheep. The nidah sheep in Hebrew would be, these excommunicated sheep almost. I will make turn the stray one, etc. Heal the wounded one, comfort the sick or infirm one, etc. And then he says, I will raise to put in front of them one sole shepherd, my servant David. He will shepherd them and will be their shepherd, and I, Yahweh, will be their God, and my servant David shall be prince or a Nazi, a lifted up one, in their midst. I have a whole page on this verb lifted up, which can refer to the lifting up of sins, which is remission of sins, like in Yom Kippur, the scapegoat lifts up or carries away all these sins. But the servant is also lifted up. This Nasa idea, God also in Isaiah is in a high and lofty throne. The servant is lifted up. In the Gospel of John, when I am lifted up, I will draw all men to myself. When you have lifted up the Son of Man, you will know that I am. He was referring to the crucifixion in chapter 12 of John, verse 32, I think. So you have, if Jesus is reading these scriptures, I think intuitively, and that's what geniuses do, and certainly inspired people also do, I don't know how much discursive thought you have to engage in to put this together. I have to try to do it. But for somebody like Jesus, this would have been an intuition of everything God had been proclaiming or prophesying through his prophets now taking place, meaning you reunify the people, bring in the ones who have been abandoned, the lost sheep of the house of Israel mentioned twice in Matthew, those who probably don't belong to any party, Pharisees or Sadducees, the Dead Sea Scrolls community, the Essenes, are strangely enough not really mentioned in the New Testament, but sons of light are mentioned, and some other Essene-like things uh, take place in the New Testament, famously in it's Second Corinthians. There are some antitheses there that between Christ and Beliar and things like that that sound incredibly Qumranish in Second Corinthians 6. And then, of course, you have the Epistle of Jude, quotes Enoch, first Enoch, as if it were prophecy. So we have to place Jesus in this context, even going as far as Pope Benedict did before he backed down, that Jesus used the other calendar that the Essenes used, which didn't coincide with the Jewish calendar. Therefore, in the Synoptics, Jesus is said to celebrate some sort of a Passover Seder, I think as the Pope said in his book, or actually in his Holy Thursday sermon that I saw in Rome in the paper reported, which I've kept, I forget the year, 2006 or something, without a lamb, because the lambs would have been slaughtered the afternoon before sundown when Passover began. That's the chronology in John. In John, he kind of doesn't mention a Passover Seder, Last Supper, but he does refer to the Seder meal, Passover meal that's going to take place after Jesus is down from the cross. What happens in John is that Jesus is slaughtered at the same time the lambs are being slaughtered in preparation for that meal. If you combine those two things, you have Jesus perhaps saying, let's celebrate a Last Supper according to our date for the Passover without a lamb, because you maintain vegetarianism too, although fish apparently are eaten. But the real mainstream Passover will take place on a different day. So that also places Jesus in this dissident calendar type Judaism. And so you have what's new about Jesus is that perhaps neglected passages, such as Ezekiel 34, of seeking out the stray rather than building these hedges around the Torah like the Pharisees would do or the rabbis. Don't contaminate yourself, go to the other side of the road type of thing in case the man is dead, the man who will be helped by the Good Samaritan. Eat with sinners, touch lepers, let menstruating women touch you, and this miraculous healing power goes out of him. I think that's undeniable. He wasn't the only one known to be a healer. I think there's Hananiah the circle drawer in the rabbinic literature. It was also known as a great thaumaturg, or miracle worker, healer. But certainly Jesus is incredibly gifted with this ability to speak and to heal and to exorcise that draws a certain following. Now, Luke has thousands and thousands, they're all piling up, there's no room. But be that as it may, for sure, Jesus had characteristics that made many, including his disciples, believe he was the Messiah. They may not have understood what that would entail for Jesus, but certainly that's what Peter, or Simon, confesses, if you will. You are the Christ, in Mark chapter 8. This might be embellished in Matthew, the Son of the Living God, or the Christ of God in Luke, or the Holy One of God in John 6, which is the version, I guess, in John of this confession at Caesarea Philippi, even though there it's in the discourse in Capernaum. Definitely, this is what Jesus is thought of. Some people say you're one of the prophets, you are Elijah, maybe come back, or John the Baptist, even. That's what maybe Herod Antipas would think. But his more intimate ones believe he's the Messiah. Now, the Messiah would be the one who would defeat the enemies of God and of his people. If you looked at Psalm 2, famous psalm, verse 7, you are my son, today I have begotten you. The language there is about smashing the heads of the enemies, which is taken up again in the book of Revelation. So by the time this is taken up in Revelation, which I think is later, certainly than the Psalm, but I'm saying later than the Gospels, or most of them anyway, this has become sort of spiritualized, I guess, already. The book of Revelation, they talk about shepherding and smashing, and there's even textual sort of difficulties that are not clear in Revelation 12:5. The woman gives birth to a male son. Have you ever heard of a female son? Well, maybe. But this Sahar type of double male is messianic. Isaiah 66:7. And he will govern the nations, the pagan nations, with an iron scepter. And you have that. And I think you have in 2:7 in Revelation, you have the line that to 27 in Revelation, you have to the victor that is faithful to my works till the end, I will give power over the nations, and he will govern them with an iron scepter. So this is kind of the democratization of the power given to the Messiah, to the people, just like occurs in Isaiah. The promises to David are extended or democratized to everyone else. Then in 1915, this is the one I'm sort of interested in 1915 Revelation, it talks about um, from his mouth comes out a sword, a sharp sword. This is Isaiah 11 language, or to smite with them the pagans, and he will govern them with an iron scepter, and he stamps or uh, treads on, stomps on the wine press of the vine of the furious wrath of God, etc. So these are all images from the Old Testament, just like healing the blind and making the lame walk are also messianic prophecies in these chapters of Isaiah 34, 35, etc. So clearly, to people who are studying the Bible, reading the Bible, listening to it with special devotion in the synagogue, perhaps with the Metargaman interpreter, commentator explaining stuff, they would have recognized these messianic signs, if you will, uh, in Jesus, so that this is kind of the context in which he is ministering. And then he's giving these beautiful parables on how the kingdom will rise very secretly, like seeds that are sown, or leaven that is put and then slowly rises, etc. And this much we can say that historically happened, that this is what Jesus was doing, and he was being recognized as Messiah by those who were so inclined. Now, a lot of people may have gone just because he has a reputation for healing you, and they were, poor and desperate. This multiplication of the loaves, for example, is attested in all four Gospels. Biblical scholars like to say that a quadruple attestation like that is one of the highest testimonies of veracity or historicity. John goes as far as to say they wanted to make him king. So something must have happened involving apparently a very large crowd regarding, multiplication of loaves and fish, feeding of a multitude, that made him have a following, and being acclaimed when he entered Jerusalem as king. There's various versions of that. Mark is the one that is allergic and fearful of making Jesus a king. There's a reference to the kingdom of our father David in Mark. But I think the most explicit one is precisely this John, where in chapter 6 they want to make him king. But if you listen to what John 12 is saying, they are saying, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and the King of Israel. And Jesus is fulfilling or dramatizing, enacting this Zechariah passage, don't fear, or Zephaniah 2 passage, don't fear, daughter of Zion, behold, your king comes seated on this. I think the best translation is purebred jackass. A donkey who has, purebred donkeys for parents, so to speak, which is mentioned in Zechariah 9. but really that's a prophetic recycling of a Torah passage in Genesis 49 when Jacob blessing his sons, when he comes to the messianic Judah, patriarch of that tribe, whence the king comes, he talks about this, uh, donkey and the son of the donkey, etc., in a step parallelism counterpart to the line that says he ties to the vine his donkey, and to the choicest vine his purebred jackass. So it's not just any vine that the donkey is tied to, and it's not just any donkey, but a purebred jackass, which was really a mount of kings in the Ugaritic literature. Kenneth Way has articles and books on this. So definitely he's acclaimed as king, and without this, the Romans would have little interest in him. So it's completely historical that he was arrested and crucified. Whether he was already arrested by Roman troops or not, as John 18 says, I don't know. It could be John's way of exaggerating how powerful the human forces were and combined that came to arrest Jesus, and he, with a word, I am, makes them fall to the ground. Or it may be a piece of history that John, unlike Mark and the others, is not afraid to include. I mean, Jesus is already political enough as a crucified guy. In Rome, they would say they follow a guy that got executed for a political insurrection crime. You don't need to embellish that anymore. It was a misunderstanding, it was envy, whatever. But in John, you have this unabashed references to Jesus as king, with the caveat, of course, my kingdom is not of this world. But nevertheless, by appearances, he's acting as a king. Understand what kind of king accurately when the story unfolds. And when he speaks to Pilate, for example, and when he says, stick back your sword in your sheath, whoever follows the sword will die by the sword. But nevertheless, Jesus does not renege or deny being a king. He could have said, oh, well. And so I think that is that titulus on the cross, that accusation on the cross, maybe in 3 languages, like John says, King of the Jews. I think that's also what Bultmann, who doubted a lot of stuff, Rudolf Bultmann, would say datum firmum. That's a fact that you can take to the bank. So as far as history is concerned, that's a summary, hopefully, I think in less than 45 minutes, of what Jesus was about. I've even talked, I think, enough about the history of Israel as far as messianic expectations go. I don't know that I need to say much more in an introduction to Christianity, so that we can probably wrap it up enough with that. And of course, the Gospels do narrate, whether it's just completely historical or not, I don't know, but the crown of thorns and being dressed like a king and all this kind of stuff. And crucifixion was the penalty for non-citizens of the Roman Empire who were guilty of a serious political crime or insurrection, especially. And I think with that, we can consider this third session. I don't know how many more there will be. I'll think of stuff that I think is interesting for an introduction to Christianity. And with the grace of God, we'll continue next time.